The wagon sat crooked in the dirt, one wheel missing, the other three half buried in mud that had dried to stone under 3 days of unforgiving sun. Cade Merrick saw it from the ridge, just a dark shape against the late afternoon glare, motionless. As a corpse, he tugged his horse to a stop and squinted through the dust. Something about it didn't sit right. Wagons didn't stop there. Not in the open, not without reason. He clicked his tongue and rode down slow. As he got closer, he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind. Crying. No, not crying, whimpering. The kind that came when someone had already cried themselves dry and didn't have anything left. But the reflex, Cade dismounted, boots crunching on sun-cracked earth. The wagon's canvas top was shredded, flapping weakly in the breeze. Supplies were scattered, tin cups, a broken crate, a child's doll face down in the dirt. He picked it up without thinking, brushed the dust from its painted face. Then he saw them. 4 girls huddled together in the shadow of the wagon like animals, trying to make themselves invisible. The oldest couldn't have been more than 16. She sat with her back against the wheel, arms wrapped tight around the youngest, a girl no older than 5 or 6, with tangled blonde hair and hollow eyes. Between them, 2 others, maybe 10 and 12, faces strewn with grime and tears. Clothes torn and stained with God knew what. The eldest looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp, defiant even through the exhaustion. "Don't," she said, her voice cracked. "Don't look at us like that." Cade froze. He didn't know what his face looked like. But whatever it was, she'd seen it before. Pity maybe, or disgust, or worse, the kind of look men gave when they saw something broken and wondered what they could take from it. He lowered his gaze and crouched down slow, keeping his distance. Set the doll on the ground between them. "Where's your folks?" he asked quietly. The girl didn't answer, just stared at him, jaw tight like she was deciding whether to spit or scream. One of the middle girls, thin as a rail with dark hair matted against her cheek, whispered something he couldn't hear. The eldest shook her head once, sharp final. Cade looked past them, scanning the area. No other tracks. No signs of a struggle, just the wagon, the girls, and miles of empty land in every direction. He stood and walked a slow circle around the site, eyes on the ground. That's when he saw it. Too shallow grave hastily dug, stones piled on top to keep the coyotes out. Fresh. Maybe 3 days old. His chest had tightened. He turned back. The eldest girl was watching him, her expression unreadable. She'd seen him notice. She knew what he'd figured out. "Fever," she said flatly. "Ma first, then part 2 days later." Cade said nothing, just nodded once. "We tried to keep going," she continued, voice brittle as old wood. "Will broke, axle snapped. We've been here since. How long you been without water?" She didn't answer, didn't need to. He could see it in the way the youngest girl's lips were cracked and peeling, in the way none of them had the strength to stand. Cade walked back to his horse and pulled his canteen free. He approached slow like he was walking up to a spooked animal and held it out. The eldest girl stared at it for a long moment, too long, before finally reaching out and taking it. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the cap and held it to the youngest girl's lips first. He watched them pass it between themselves, each taking only a sip before handing it to the next. Discipline, survival instinct, they learned fast. "You got family?" Cade asked. "Anyone expecting you?" The eldest girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and shook her head. "We were headed to Sacramento, P's brother, but we don't know where he is. Don't even know if he's still alive." Cade exhaled slow through his nose. He looked west where the sun was starting to dip, painting the sky in shades of rust and blood. Then he looked back at the girls, for pairs of eyes staring at him. Waiting, not hopeful. Just waiting. He should have ridden on. Should have pointed them toward the nearest town and wished them luck. That's what most men would have done. It wasn't his problem, wasn't his burden, but when he looked at them, really looked, he saw something that made his stomach twist. The second youngest girl, the one with dark hair, had a bruise on her wrist shaped like fingers. And the way the eldest kept herself between him and the others, the way her eyes tracked every movement he made. They'd already met men on this road, and those men hadn't been kind. Cad's jaw tightened. He turned away, staring at the horizon, fists clenched at his sides. He was angry, not at them, at the world. At the kind of men who saw for girls alone and saw opportunity instead of tragedy. At himself maybe for all the times he'd ridden past trouble. Because it wasn't his to carry. My ranch is 2 hours north. He said finally, voice rough, you can come with me, get food, water, rest. Then we'll figure out what comes next. The eldest girl's eyes narrowed. Why? Because you'll die out here if you don't. That's not what I asked. Cade met her gaze. Held. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'm not leaving you here. She stuttered him for a long time, then slowly she nodded. It took another 20 minutes to get them on their feet and onto his horse. The youngest rode in front of him. Half asleep before they had gone a mile, the others walked alongside, silent as ghosts. Cade led them north as the sun bled out behind them. And the only sound was the crunch of boots on stone and the wind whispering through the sagebrush. He didn't know their names yet, didn't know where they'd come from or what they'd seen, but he knew one thing for certain, bringing them home was going to change everything. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had gone full dark. Cat's foreman, a grizzled man named Hal, was standing on the porch with a rifle when they rode up. He lowered it the moment he saw the girls, but his expression didn't soften. Hell, Cade. Hal muttered, what you bring home this time? Trouble probably, Cade said. He dismounted and helped the youngest girl down, her legs buckling the moment her feet touched the ground. He caught her before she fell. Get water, food, blankets. Hal hesitated, eyes flicking between Cade and the girls. You know what people are going to say. I don't care what people say. Hal stared at him for another beat, then nodded and disappeared inside. Cade carried the youngest girl into the house and sat her down gently on the couch. The others followed, moving like shadows. The eldest stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darting around the room like she was mapping escape routes. What's your name? Cade asked. She didn't answer right away, just watched him. Finally, Eliza. Eliza, he repeated, and them. She glanced at her sisters, Ruth, Mary, and that's Abigail. The youngest, still curled on the couch, eyes half closed. Cade nodded. You can stay the night longer if you need. No strings. There's always strings. Eliza said flatly. Cade didn't argue. He just turned and walked into the kitchen where Hal was already heating beans and cutting bread. They worked in silence, and when the food was ready, Cade brought it out on a tray. The girls ate like they hadn't seen food in a week. Maybe they hadn't afterward. Cade set them up in the back room, his late wife's sewing room, and touched 3 years. It still smelled faintly of lavender. He gave them blankets, pillows, and a lantern, then closed the door and left them alone. Hal was waiting for him in the front room, arms crossed. You going to tell me what this is about? They got nowhere else to go, so you're just keeping them. Cade shot him a look. I'm giving them shelter, that's all. Howell shook his head, you know? The talk this will stir up. For girls, no parents, you a widower. People are going to say things. Cade, ugly things. Let them, they'll come for you. The county, the church, they'll say you can't keep them, that it ain't proper. Cade was silent for a long moment. Then I'll deal with it when it comes. Hal sighed and walked out, leaving Cade alone in the dim light of the oil lamp. He sat down heavily in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. The truth was, Hal wasn't wrong. This was going to bring trouble, but Cade had stopped caring about trouble a long time ago. It was 3 days before Eliza spoke to him again. She found him in the barn mending a saddle. The other girls were outside with Hal, learning how to feed the chickens. Eliza stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. You knew them, didn't you? She said suddenly. Cat's hand stilled. He didn't look up. Knew who? Our parents. He set the saddle down slowly and finally met her eyes. She was staring at him with that same sharp, suspicious look, like she'd been piecing something together and had just figured out the answer. How'd you know? He asked quietly. You didn't ask our last name, Eliza said. You didn't ask where we were from. You didn't ask anything. You just brought us here like you already knew. Cade was silent. Our names, Pritchard, Eliza continued, Daniel and Sarah Pritchard, ring a bell. Cade exhaled slow and leaned back against the workbench. Yeah, he said, it does, so. Who were you to them? Nobody, Cade said, just someone who should have done more. Eliza frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Cade looked away, jaw tight, for a long moment. He didn't say anything. Then, 8 years ago, your father came to me, asked for help. His farm was failing, drought hit hard that year, he needed a loan, just enough to get through the season. And I said, no. Cade's voice was flat, emotionless. I had my own problems. My wife was sick. I didn't have money to spare, so I turned him away. Eliza stared at him, unreadable. 2 months later, I heard he'd lost the farm. Cade continued. Bank took it. He packed up what he could and headed west. I figured he'd land on his feet. That he'd be fine. But he wasn't. No, Cade said quietly. He wasn't. Eliza's expression didn't change. She just kept staring at him, arms crossed, like she was deciding what to do with this information. So that's why, she said finally, guilt, maybe you think this makes it right. Her voice was sharp now, cutting. You think taking us in fixes what you didn't do back then? No, Cade said honestly, I don't. Then why? Because I can't undo the past, Cade said. But I can do something now. Eliza's jaw tightened. She looked like she wanted to say something. Something angry, something that would hurt, but she didn't. Instead, she just turned and walked out, leaving Cade alone in the barn with the weight of 8 years pressing down on his chest. He sat there for a long time, staring at the dirt floor. The saddle forgotten beside him. Outside, he could hear the girls laughing. Faint, fragile, but real. And for the first time in years, Cade Merrick allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some things could still be saved. But trouble came 6 days later. Cade was in the north pasture checking fence lines when he saw the dust cloud rising. From the east, 3 riders moving fast. He recognized the lead horse before he saw the man. A big bay gelding with a white blaze. Sheriff Tanner. Cade's jaw tightened. He turned his horse and rode back toward the house. By the time he got there, the sheriff and his 2 deputies were already dismounting. Hal stood on the porch, rifle resting casually against his shoulder. The girls were nowhere in sight. Cade had told them to stay inside if anyone came. Cade, Sheriff Tanner said, tipping his hat. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes like chips of flint. Got a minute, depends on what you're here for, Cade said, swinging down from his saddle. Just to talk, Tanner said, heard you've been harboring some orphans. They're not orphans, they've got family in Sacramento. Do they now? Tanner's tone was mild, but his eyes weren't. Funny thing, I sent a wire to Sacramento, no Pritchards registered there. No family expecting them. Cade said nothing. Now, I'm not saying you did anything wrong. Tanner continued, but you got for young girls living under your roof. No parents. No legal guardian. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. It ain't that simple. Cade. Tanner stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know how this looks. A man like you, a widower taking in for girls. The county's got an obligation to make sure everything's proper. Everything's proper. Then you won't mind if I take them down to the church, Tanner said. Reverend Collier's got a family willing to take them in. Good Christian folks, they'll be looked after. Cade's hands clenched into fists. They're staying here. That's not your call to make. It is until you show me a court order saying otherwise. Tanner's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult. Cade, you're the one making it difficult. For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. The deputies shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward their sidearms. Hal's grip tightened on his rifle. Then the door opened. Eliza stepped out onto the porch, followed by her sisters. She looked at Tana, then at Cade, then back at Tana. We're not going anywhere, she said clearly. Tana blinked, surprised. Miss, this ain't your decision. Yes, it is, Eliza interrupted. You said the county's got an obligation to make sure we're safe. Well, we're safe here. We've got food, shelter, and Mr. Merrick hasn't laid a hand on us. So, unless you've got proof otherwise, You've got no reason to take us. Tanner's mouth tightened. It's not about proof, girl. It's about propriety. Propriety? Eliz's voice was sharp, now cutting. Where was propriety when men tried to drag us off the road 3 days before Mr. Merrick found us? Where was propriety when the town we passed through wouldn't give us water? Because we didn't have money? Don't talk to me about propriety. Sheriff, you don't care about us. You care about what people think. Tanner's face flushed. Now you listen here. No, you listen. Eliza stepped forward, chin raised. We are staying. And if you try to take us, well, run, and well, keep running, and every time you drag us back, well, run again. So ask yourself, Sheriff, how much effort are you willing to put into this? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Tanner stared at her, jaw working, then he turned to Cade. This ain't over, he said quietly. Count will send someone, a judge, maybe, and when they do, you won't have a choice, we'll see. Cade said. Tanner held his gaze for another beat, then turned and mounted his horse. Hi, as deputies followed, they rode off without another word, leaving nothing but dust and tension in their wake. Hal let out a long breath and lowered his rifle. Well, he muttered, that went about as bad as I expected. Cade didn't respond. He was looking at Eliza, who was still standing on the porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did, Eliza replied. Then she turned and walked back inside, her sisters trailing after her. Cade stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Hal came down off the porch and clapped him on the shoulder. You know they're coming back, right? I know. And you know this is going to get worse before it gets better. I know that too. Howell shook his head. You're a stubborn son of a Cade. Yeah, Cade said quietly, I am. That night Cade sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the dark expanse of his land. The stars were bright overhead, cold and distant. He thought about Sheriff Tanner, about the county, about all the people who'd come knocking, demanding explanations, demanding control. And he thought about Eliza, standing on that porch, defiant and unafraid, refusing to be taken. She reminded him of someone, his wife. Sarah had been like that, fierce, stubborn, unwilling to bend. She'd stood up to everyone who told her she couldn't marry a poor rancher with nothing but dirt and dreams. She'd stood up to the illness that took her, fought it tooth and nail until the very end. Cade hadn't been able to save her, but maybe, just maybe, he could save these girls. He took a sip of his coffee and stared into the darkness. Let them come. The days that followed were quiet, but the kind of quiet that felt like holding your breath. Cade kept the girls close, taught them how to work the ranch, feeding animals, mending fences, hauling water. Eliza took to it quickly, her hands rough and capable. Ruth and Mary learned slower, but they tried. Abigail, the youngest, mostly followed Hal around, asking questions he pretended to be annoyed by, but secretly loved. It was 2 weeks before Eliza spoke to him. Again, beyond simple necessity, she found him in the barn one evening brushing down his horse. She leaned against the stall door, arms crossed, watching him work. You loved her, she said suddenly. Cade paused, brush in hand. Who? Your wife? He didn't answer right away, just went back to brushing. Yeah, he said finally. I did. What was she like? Cade was quiet for a long moment. Strong, he said, stubborn, kind. She didn't take nonsense from anyone. Eliza smiled faintly. Sounds like someone I know. Cade glanced at her. You reminding me of her. Maybe. Eliza's smile faded. Or maybe I'm just trying to figure out why you're doing this. I told you why. You told me guilt. Eliza said, but guilt doesn't make someone stand up to the sheriff. Guilt doesn't make someone risk everything for girls they barely know. Cade set the brush down and turned to face her. Then what do you think it is? Eliza stuttered. I searching. I think you're trying to fix something, she said quietly. Something you couldn't fix before. Cade said nothing. You couldn't save your wife. Eliza continued. You couldn't save my father, so now you're trying to save us. She paused, but we're not broken. Mr. Merrick, we are just lost. Cade exhaled slowly. Maybe I'm lost, too. Eliza's expression softened just a little. She stepped into the stall and picked up a piece of straw, twirling it between her fingers. My father used to say that the measure of a man wasn't what he did when things were easy. It was what he did when everything fell apart. Your father was a good man, Cade said quietly. He was, Eliza agreed, but he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He thought the world was kinder than it was. She looked up at Cade, but he never stopped trying. Even when everything fell apart, Cade held her gaze. I should have helped him. Maybe, Eliza said, but you're helping us now. That's got to count for something. For the first time since they'd arrived, Cade saw something in her eyes that wasn't anger or suspicion. It was trust, fragile, tentative, but real. So here's the question that changes everything. If you were in Cad's shoes, would you have taken them in knowing the cost, knowing what was coming? Take a breath, pour yourself a drink, and think about what you'd do if your lives depended on a choice you made in the dust. If you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this turns out. That night, Cade sat on the porch again, but this time he wasn't alone. Eliza sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the stars. You ever think about leaving? She asked. The Ranchi yell. Cade shook his head. This is all I've got. That's not true, Eliza said. You've got us now. Cade looked at her surprised. She smiled faintly. Whether you want Edis or not? He chuckled softly. Guess I do. They sat in silence for a while, the night air cool and still. Thank you, Eliza said quietly, for not leaving us out there. Cade didn't respond, just nodded once, slow and deliberate, and in that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like the first crack of ice on a frozen river. The county judge arrived 3 weeks later. His name was Howard Pierce, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a leather satchel full of documents. Sheriff Tanner rode with him along with Reverend Collier and a woman named Mrs. Brennan, who ran the church's charity house. Cade met them. At the gate, Mr. Merrick, Judge Pierce said, dismounting, I trust you know why we are here. I've got a pretty good idea, Cade said. Then you understand that the county has a legal obligation to ensure the welfare of these girls. Pierce continued, we've arranged placement with a respectable family. The girls will be well cared for. They're already well cared for, Cade said. That's not for you to decide. Then who decides? Cade shot back. You, the county. People who don't know them and don't care, Mr. Merrick. They want to stay. Cade interrupted. Ask them yourself. Pierce hesitated, then nodded. Very well, bring them out. Cade turned and called into the house. Eliza emerged first, followed by her sisters. They stood on the porch, silent and watchful. Girls, Pierce said, his tone softer now. We are here to help you. We found a good family who's willing to take you in. You'll have a proper home, schooling, a future. Eliza crossed her arms. We already have that here, miss. This isn't, we are staying, Ruth said, stepping forward. She was 10, small for her age, but her voice was steady. Mr. Merrick's been good to us. He's fed us, protected us. We're not leaving. That's not your decision to make, Mrs. Brennan said gently. Your children, you don't understand. We understand. Plenty, Mary interrupted. She was 12 and her eyes were hard. We understand that nobody cared when we were dying in the dirt, but Mr. Merrick did. So we are staying with him. Pierce frowned. He looked at Tanner, then at Cade. Mr. Merrick, you must understand that this is highly irregular. You're not a relative. You're not married. The law doesn't allow. Then change the law, Cade said. Pierce blinked. Excuse me, you heard me. Cade said, if the law says I can't take care of them, then the law's wrong. Change it. That's not how it works. Then make it work. Cad's voice was hard now. Unyielding because I'm not handing them over to strangers. I don't care what the county says. I don't care what the church says. They're staying. The silence that followed was thick and tense. Then from behind them, a voice spoke up. He's right. Everyone turned. Hal was standing at the edge of the yard, along with 3 other men, neighbors, ranchers Cade had worked with for years. They dismounted and walked forward, standing beside Cade. Cat's been a good man to this county. Hal said he's helped every one of us at some point. If he says those girls are safe with him, then they're safe with him. This isn't a popularity contest. Pierce said stiffly, the law's meant to protect people. One of the other ranchers said, a man named Tom, grizzled and scarred, not tear families apart. They're not a family. Yes, we are. Abigail said suddenly. Her voice was small but clear. She looked up at Pierce with wide eyes. We're a family now. Pierce stared at her, his expression softening despite himself. He looked at the girls, at Cade, at the men standing beside him. Then he sighed and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is highly irregular, he said again, so let it be irregular. Cade said. Pierce was silent for a long moment, then he put his glasses back on and looked at Sheriff Tanner. Sheriff, do you have any evidence that these girls are in danger? Tanner hesitated, then slowly he shook his head. No, Your Honor, and you, Reverend. Pierce looked at Collier. Do you have concerns about their welfare? Collier opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the girls, then at Cade, then back at Pierce. Finally, he shook his head. No, Your Honor, I don't. Pierce nodded. He pulled a piece of paper from his satchel and scribbled something on it. Then he handed it to Cade. Temporary guardianship, he said, pending a formal review in 6 months. If everything remains satisfactory, we'll make it permanent. Cade stared at the paper, hardly believing it. Don't make me regret this, Mr. Merrick, Pierce said quietly. I won't. Cade said. Pierce nodded, then mounted his horse. Tanner and the others followed. They rode off without another word, leaving Cade standing in the yard with a piece of paper in his hand. And for girls watching him from the porch, Hal clapped him on the shoulder. Well, he ate. That went better than I expected. Cade looked at the paper again, then at the girls. Eliza was smiling. Not much, just a little, but it was enough. Yeah, Cade said quietly, it did. 6 months later, the county review came and went without issue. Judge Pierce signed the papers, and the Pritchard sisters became permanent wards of Cade Merrick. Eliza took over managing the house. Ruth learned to cook. Mary became Hal's shadow, learning everything there was to know about ranching. And Abigail's sweet, quiet Abigail started going to school in town, where she made friends and brought home drawings she'd made in class. Cade built them a bigger room, added beds, shelves, a window that faced east so the morning light would wake them gently. He taught them to ride, to shoot, to survive, and slowly over time, the ranch stopped feeling like a place haunted by ghosts. It felt like home. Years later, people would talk about the angry rancher who took in for orphan girls and changed everything. They'd say he was a hero, a saint, a man who defied the odds. But Cade never saw it that way. To him, it was simple. He'd failed once and he'd spent 8 years carrying that weight. But this time, he hadn't failed, and that was enough. The sun dipped lower over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Cade stood on the porch watching the girls work in the yard, laughing, bickering, alive. Eliza looked up and caught his eye. She smiled and Cade smiled back. Some things he realized were worth fighting for, even when the whole world said no.